We're going to finish up this failed faith in the next several Sundays, and some of this is setting up the rest of the series, which will conclude around the 28th, I would imagine. And so we need to go back to Exodus. We've been all around now. We looked at manna, and we looked at where it began and where it ended and so forth, and we're just actually picking this up from where we left off in April, and then we did another series, and so just a few more here. The idea of failed faith, the situations around which faith tends to fail, to watch out for. The remarkable consistency of Israel to have their faith fail. It is really stunning. And in this stretch that we're talking about here, it's even more stunning because it happens over the same thing over and over again. No matter how many times God has delivered them and provided for them, they will definitely always just fall apart. And so we're going to take a look here in Exodus chapter 17. It might even sound a little familiar to you, even though we have not been here before. But here we go in verse 2. Let me see. Verse 1. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, Give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river. Take in thine hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the Lord, or in the sight of the elders of the Lord. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Does that sound familiar to anybody who's been here for a while? Would it surprise you if I told you we have not read this in this series yet? That this is almost verbatim what had happened in a different place? In fact, that's kind of what we want to talk about just a little bit, but just a few things as we go on here. We have this. It's not. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's not working. Okay, cool. That's all right. Meribah, the tale of two Meribahs. Okay, we're going to talk about that. A tale of two Meribahs for the next several Sundays. And so we'll have this first one here, Meribah in Exodus. Okay? So, but there's, again, the familiar thing that might sound a lot like this, that was found in chapter 15, where we talked about Mara, right? Mara, it means bitter, right? We talked about that. It was where the water was bitter, the people were thirsty, and they only had bitter water to drink, and so they threw some wood in the water, sweeten it up right now. But it was almost verbatim what happened here. They began to become a little thirsty, that you might read. The people thirsted in verse 3, and they murmured against Moses and said that, why did you bring us out of Egypt to let us and our children die out here in the wilderness? Okay, that is almost exactly what you heard in Exodus 15, but now they called the place in verse 7 Meribah, which means quarreling, and Massah, which means tempting. And so this place is similar situation where the Israelites are thirsty and there's no water. It's not bitter water, it's just no water. And so when all is said and done, they look back and they say, yeah, we should call this place quarreling and we should call this place tempting. I mean, that'd be an interesting thing to do in your own life. We should call this massive marital fight. Let's call that right there, this little spot in our home. Or let's call this place the place where I got into a fight in 5th grade. I got into a fist fight in 5th grade. We'll call it like that. But this is how it works in the Old Testament. They called places by significant things that happened, and this is the sort of things that seem familiar. But what's really interesting about this is that it happens to everyone unless you're really intentional about it. You kind of lose track. The Bible's a weird book. Things that happen, depends on where you're reading, in a couple of pages can be hundreds of years apart. And then there's places where 3 or 4 pages represent just a day or two. But the idea of remember, Marah was in Exodus 15, and Meribah here is in 17. And that's really sort of, I think, sort of equal to the distance they've traveled. In fact, I got a map for you. You guys like maps? Because it's always interesting to me to look at a map, because we always, again, imagine things in our head. But take a look at this. Way up top there, it says Goshen. That's where this whole thing starts, right? When they leave Egypt with a high hand, I can handle this, guys. Don't worry about it. The Goshen up there. It's really interesting too. I mean, if put the teaching cap on, that green spot up there, that little triangle. That's actually a very lush area, and that's when the Bible says that Pharaoh gave them the best land in Egypt. That's it right there. And it's connected to the river and so forth. And so it's a very good land to live. But when they leave, they start heading south, down to the bottom of that V, that other triangle there. And we get down there, and right there, the Straits of Train, you have them. That's where they cross one of the places where they cross over the water. And then you get to that first circle there, right by the wilderness of Shur. That is Marah. That's where the first place that they didn't have, or they found the bitter waters, right? And they murmured against Moses, they chided against Moses. Why did you bring us out here in the wilderness to die? That's where that happened. You see that? You see it? Can you see that first circle right there? Okay. Well, the second circle there, that's Meribah. And you really can't see it too well here, but that's the place we're looking at now. And so the first circle is Exodus 15, the second circle is Exodus 17. And if you look at this one, you can kind of see a little bit better how close they are. Right? They have a little handy-dandy little scale there. So it's, they don't make a straight line from Marah to Rephidim or Meribah. They kind of make a little circular, half circle route there. So it's maybe 70 kilometers, about 35, 40 miles. So that's maybe 100 miles they've gone. Right? Maybe. And they've got a large group of people they got to take through there, but it can't be more than 2 weeks' journey. So they get to Marah, right? They get to Marah, and the water's bitter. Oh, God, why did you do this? Or Moses, why did you do this? Why did you bring us out here to die? Why would all these bad things? Would to God we hadn't left Egypt. And God does something miraculous and supplies water. 2 weeks later, oh my goodness, why would you do this to us? Why would you send us out into the wilderness to die? Would to God we'd gone back to Egypt. What in the world is wrong with you, Moses? 2 weeks it takes them to forget almost all of it. Right? So when we talk about 2 Meribahs, I'm going to show you a map little thing here. Just keep in mind how quickly they are complaining again. And complaining in a very extravagant fashion. It's not like, oh man, I'm thirsty. It's like, oh man, you ever seen kids do that? Oh man, I'm gonna die, right? I'm just gonna die. It's not fair. I mean, that was the common refrain. Nothing is ever fair to a child, right? Everything is always unfair. But this is the extravagant kind of complaining. So when we talk about 2 Meribahs, we'll come back to this next time, but that third circle up top, that's the second Meribah. But it's the third place that there's a water problem. So between Exodus and Numbers, there's 3 times that Israel will complain as though they are going to die about water. That last one happens at the end of the 40-year journeys, but we'll talk about that next time in the book of Numbers. But for now, just remember down there, it's been about 100 miles. It's maybe 2 weeks that has passed. And you see the same old problem. You kind of get that same old problem. Oh, I do have that up there now. Same old problem is in verse 7. The problem of the Israelites. Let me take a look at the end here real quick, and we'll bring it around, is this. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah. Remember the idea of temptation and of quarreling because of the children of Israel. And because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So here's really one of the first problems is this. You've got this people's faith has once again completely failed. Again, 2 weeks, 100 miles. And what's the last question? What's the question that they asked? Look at the last part of verse 7. Is the Lord among us or not? Well, you don't remember 2 weeks ago? Do you think he just left? Did he take a day off? Is it summer for the Lord and the Lord goes fishing or camping and he forgets about his people? Like happens here, right? I mean, this is what happens around here. People just leave and take off their last summer vacations and all that sort of stuff. Does that happen? Is he with? Of course he's with you. What happened? The faith completely failed once again, so very, very quickly from the first time that it did back in Marah. But here's also, you have that issue there. The faith has completely failed. So God outlines a procedure here. It begins in verse 5, and he says basically this, and the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the Lord. And so here's a few things as far as the procedure the Lord outlines. First of all, take the elders, right? Take the elders and your staff. Take the elders and the rod that you stuck into the water previously. Go there. And he says this also. He says, I will be with you, right? There's a few things there. Number one, I will be with you. Understand this. This is something, again, is very, very critical for next time, is this, that this is the Lord's work. Right? Moses is just his servant. I will be with you, because what needs to be done, you cannot do. That's the idea. I will be with you because what needs to be done, you cannot do. Second is this, he says this, and how many of you read this before, about striking the rock? Yeah, you go there and you smack the rock, right? Once again, that's critical. You go there and you hit the rock and you hit it one time. And then he says to drink all you want. That's the way it'll work. And they do. And they are fine. And that question of whether God is with them or not is answered again, like it will be so many other times. It's just an incredible cycle of abuse that they actually fall into. And so when you look at it, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, my goodness, what else is there to say about this? Of people's chronic loss of faith, the habitual nature by which they never seem to ever fully come into a place of trusting the Lord. Because you see them get into this weird sort of again, cycle where Israel will ride these great big old high spiritual peaks, and then they drop down into basically spiritual depression. I mean, you've read about it so far. I mean, you've read several occasions of it. How many times to Exodus 17 have you seen Israel write songs and sing unto the Lord when they leave Egypt, and they're celebrating and there's shouts and everybody's happy, and when he provides things for them along the way. Once he provides for them, they're at rest and they're at peace and they're dancing and they're, again, writing songs and everything else. They're way up here. They were way up there when the waters were turned sweet. In 2 weeks, now they're back down here. It's an interesting phenomenon. It's interesting how it goes. You kind of get the idea. This, I guess, one of the reasons why I think the New Testament reveals that the Jewish people seek a sign. That's what Jesus said. Jews seek a sign. They will not be given one. There's something about their faith that required them to see things. They wanted to see evidence of God all around them. But it's also a dangerous pattern you can observe in this. A dangerous pattern in that the Israeli people, again, get fired up, they sing songs, they celebrate, they dance, and they worship in the wake of every miracle that God performs. I mean, in the wake of every miracle, there's some form of celebration that is going on. But when the sun rises on the next day, basically that celebratory spirit, that real confidence that God is with them seems to dissolve as the sun itself begins to warm up the day. In other words, they have this sort of wave trough effect. The faith of the Israelis never settles into consistency. It's always high or it's way down here. Right? Have you noticed that? It's always either way up here, we're celebrating, we're dancing, we're writing songs, we're worshiping, or down there. Is God with us or not? Why did you bring us out here to kill us in the wilderness? I mean, it's never any form of consistency, and it's never sort of the sloping, gradual line. It's like hitting the edge of a cliff, and they're done. It's interesting, though, because I was thinking about some application for us this morning in that. And it's to say this. I mean, not only have I experienced part of that, but I've seen a lot of Christians ride that same kind of wave. They range from near zealotry. I mean, you ever been around a believer that is just almost zealous about spreading the gospel or about serving or about, I mean, they're just like they're on some sort of controlled substance. They're so amped up about serving and about doing things. And then all of a sudden one day they're gone. You look around and where'd you go? Hey, has anybody seen what's his face? Hey, has anybody seen what's her name? You know what I'm talking about? Please, somebody say amen. Or if I'm just, all right. Or that's the thing that goes on. When they're in the wake of spiritual high point, they're ready to charge hell with a squirt gun, but it's usually only lasts for a very brief period, and then they're sullenly looking for the next hit. They're suddenly looking for the next fix. I've known people like that. And you just begin to pray that something magnificent happens in their life because you can see them teetering, just like Israel, on the ledge, and they're about to slide off into oblivion because there's no constancy. There's no consistent sort of spiritual walk. It's either way high or it's way low, and they're always looking for the next hit of spiritual adrenaline. So I called it this, the Meribahs syndrome. The Meribahs syndrome for Christians. Because again, you have that whole idea that goes on where people are needing that fix. But here's what it is. It's basically, at its essence, it's a lack of spiritual consistency. I know a lot of people who've never turned the world upside down for Jesus. I know a lot of people that never sawed off a finger and watched it grow back right before their eyes. I know a lot of people who've just lived life as a believer. I know people who've taught Sunday school for 30 years. I know people who have blessed the people they taught in Sunday school when those people come back after 30 years and see them still there, still teaching, or still in the same church, or whatever. I've just seen, life is really not all that exciting. Has anybody else noticed that? Okay, now I'm getting amens all over the place. All right. Life is just, it's not what you thought it was going to be, right? It's not, maybe you're not the superhero, you're not the one who's finding all the spies in the government, you're not the person who's saving the day, getting the girl, and making it home for dinner. It doesn't always work like that. I've said this before. I had a professor in college say, life is so daily. You look up and here you are, wherever you are, how old you are, and yesterday you were 20 years younger, and it's just an accumulation of days. It's not this jumping from 14,000 foot peak to 14,000 foot peak. It just kind of goes. I wrote an article once called Ordinary. And it was written after my daughter got on a plane to go back to Bible college, after she visited my oldest daughter. And our house was like 5 miles from the airport. You could hear every plane that was taking off. It wasn't obnoxious, but you could hear it. And we went and dropped her off to go back to Chicago and go back to Moody. And, sending your daughter back to Chicago at the time felt like giving her a death sentence. No offense against Chicago. I know a couple people here from Chicago. It's not that. It's just what it's become. But anyway, Cheryl and I went home. And, you get home and the other kids were at school and you just lay there in bed for a second sad, because your daughter is leaving for the jungle in Illinois. And we could hear a plane come overhead. We were just laying there, and there she goes. And I looked over, I saw a picture of all three of our kids on the wall. And they were beautiful and perfect, and they were about this tall. And I had one flying off to college, and I had two others in high school. And I realized I was pretty ordinary. It's pretty ordinary to get married, to live, to have some kids. I remember when we were dating, I told Cheryl, man, if you ever see me on a weekend doing yard work, would you please kill me? And of course, now she's the one asking me to do yard work typically, or I'm helping her do yard work. But when you're younger, you don't realize how glorious ordinary can be. I think I said in whatever I wrote, I said that, my kids didn't need me to be a crime fighter, a super sleuth. They didn't need me to be famous. They didn't need me to know presidents and kings. They needed me to worry about things like gas mileage and new tires and how I'm going to get them to school. They needed me to worry about how I was going to feed them. They needed me to worry about showing up and being there. And they needed me to worry about loving their mom. And they needed me to worry about the roof over their head. They needed me to be ordinary. And somehow, for whatever reason, what has happened so often in Christianity is I don't know if it's the television or what, but we get this idea that Christianity should be this great big magical roadshow where wonderful things happen at church every Sunday and unexplainable things happen every day in our life, and we fail to appreciate the ordinary, the stick-to-itiveness, the groundedness and the rootedness of faithfulness. And faithfulness is very ordinary. Faithfulness doesn't come with a cape. Faithfulness doesn't come with superpowers. Faithfulness doesn't have all these great high peaks that you can live off of and look for the next one that's around the corner. Faithfulness is just showing up. It's worrying about how can I grow and how can I keep the world from squeezing in on my time. And it's just showing up. And the Meribahs syndrome, if we start living for the peaks, right? We start jumping from peak to peak and we think that's going to feed us. There's coming a cliff. And somebody's going to look around and say, hey, have you seen Cheryl? Have you seen Kate? Have you seen Kevin? Have you seen whomever? Oh yeah, they used to go. What happened to them? Gone, right? That's the idea. It's a lack of spiritual consistency. So here, I got just a couple of ideas for you about that kind of a situation, how to avoid it, how we all can avoid it. First of all, I think is this. One is to feed your faith. Christianity, healthy, faithful Christianity, for lack of a better word, is very ordinary. Look, I know that there's all sorts of things that people can watch and listen to, and it looks like the great big flashy miracle things and the great big filled stadiums and stuff. But you know what? Ordinary Christianity is never meant to be. It's meant to be you. It's meant to be just ordinary churches on corners in ordinary towns. But you still have to feed your faith, and feeding faith on the extravagant and the exciting, and if your faith is relying upon great big, not that there's anything wrong with that, but if it relies on being fed by the magnificent and the unexplainable, then it's like eating a bunch of sugar, right? You're just going and going and going and going, and then pretty soon you're sleeping for 14 hours. And that's the way it goes. You have to feed your faith. I mean, there's just no other way about it. Faith, unfed and unnurtured, rots very quickly. It begins to compromise and it begins to rust, and no Christian can live on spiritual highs. You can't. You can't rely on somebody else to pump you up all the time. You can't rely on that. It just doesn't work. It's no different again, you see it so many times. That is no different than any other drug. Right? You see one thing this Sunday, you want to see something bigger next Sunday. You want to see something bigger the Sunday after that. Because after all, it's not such a big deal now. If somebody gets saved, that's glorious. But how about if somebody is healed from something? Or how about something, you're just told this all the time. It's sort of blared back at you if you're not careful. I could say a lot of things there that I will not, but I am tempted to. But what happens is that living for spiritual highs, soon what you find is the euphoria is much, much more shorter-lived. It's much shorter-lived. And the time between the peaks is filled with apathy and even spiritual depression. Consistency. Feed your faith. It is in the disciplines of Bible reading, prayer, worship, and fellowship that a faith is fed. Any faith that is consistent over the course of decades is extraordinary, because the flashes and the pans are almost limitless. They really are. And again, You can see evidence of it even in the life of Jesus. At one time, he amassed a following that, was almost innumerable. And one day it was cut down to about 12. The flash in the pan, right? It's all of that sort of stuff. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4:15, he spoke of a situation where the outer man is perishing. I feel often the outer man perishing. I woke up this morning, my ankle hurt for zero reason. And that is on the heels of my wrist hurting for zero reason. Unless Cheryl's taking a hammer to me at night, and I don't know, I'm waking up. And I'm talking pain. I'm talking like, oh my goodness, I need a doctor kind of pain. No reason. Right? The outer man's perishing, but what does he say in 2 Corinthians 4:15? He says this, but the inner man is renewed daily. Catch the word. It's propped up in sermons the last few weeks. Daily. Daily. Give us this day our what? Daily bread. On this day, give us our daily bread. Daily renew the inner man. And again, if we were to talk about a lot of things, you'll find that I'm not a very mystical person. I believe in a lot of mystery regarding God. I believe that there's things we cannot know. But I'm telling you, the essentials that for life and living and Christian growth are not mysterious. Right? How is the inner man renewed day by day? Oh, some mystical this and mystical that and this, that. No, it's Bible reading, prayer, worship, fellowship. Those are the means that we have to maintain a consistent and growing faith. That's how you renew the inner man on a daily basis. That's how. So feed your faith. It's absolutely, in fact, I put it here. The inner man is renewed daily with these means, the means of Bible reading, prayer, worship, and fellowship. That's what it comes down to. Renewed daily, and it leads to a consistent and consistently healthy spiritual walk that will probably not get you written up in a Christian biography. Most of us our lives are not going to be learned by the people that come after us. But we rest in a faith, and a lot of times we meet in buildings that were built and sacrificed for by generations of faithful believers whom none of us know. But one thing they were was consistent. They showed up. And not just to church, they showed up at the morning table and read their Bible. They showed up in the evening and prayed. They showed up all day long in submitting to the Lord. They showed up for fellowship. They encouraged people. They prayed for people. And they received back from people those same. Again, nothing that is going to make an exciting novel. There's not going to be a worldwide television broadcast of the life of a person who simply shows up every day to do the things that are necessary to feed a spiritual walk that is consistent, but it is glorious nonetheless. Feed your faith. You can't go from high to high without a complete drop-off. And then also this, remember this, is this: uncertainty is a dangerous place. One of the things, if I was to allow anything to the nation of Israel, and I really wouldn't, but if I was in a gracious mood, it was an uncertain journey they were taking. Millions of people in a wilderness, and water was not everywhere. And in fact, the water that they received wasn't there when they first walked to get it, right? Moses had to hit a rock, and out comes water. So it wasn't like they could see it coming from afar. So there was some uncertainty here. Hey, look, we're running out of water. Doesn't justify what happened, but again, if I'm in a gracious mood, that's what I'm going to say. I can kind of understand the uncertainty. So you see that in almost every situation that the Israelis face where their faith completely fails, it involves some kind of uncertainty. How are we going to get away from Pharaoh's chariots? How are we going to eat? Right? Red Sea parts, manna and quail. How are we going to drink? Hit the rock. There's some form of uncertainty nearly every time their faith just goes away. And it leads you to conclude that uncertainty is a very dangerous place for people in faith. Always in the uncertainties you find Israel. faith leading them down into spiritual failure. And the only way I know of to combat uncertainty is with certainty. That sounds weird, I suppose. But the way you combat uncertainty is with certainty. Lives that are built on either the flash of the world, the opportunities for gain or notoriety, and even lives that are built on simply the promise of tomorrow. They all ride wild roller coasters of spiritual peaks and valleys. Why? Because this is the thing. If uncertainty is a dangerous place, here's the double danger, and that is because of this. It is because uncertainty is a constant companion in life. Isn't it? Uncertainty is a constant companion in life. Thank you. I need to find out who's saying that. But it's with you all the time. Go to the doctor again for a lump you found. That's uncertainty. Lose your job or watch inflation go through the roof. That's uncertainty. Right? It's all around. You hear about every prayer request that you've gotten on the prayer chain is uncertainty. It's with us everywhere that we go. And when it comes to things in this world, we're prone to wonder if they will ever come or if we can keep them or what's God going to do. In other words, we live lives not unlike the Israelis. We just don't know. Will the stock market go up or down? I don't know. It's uncertain. Who will be here next week or next month or next year? I don't know. That's uncertain. Again, it's with us every place that we go. And so the only way to fight that uncertainty is with certainty. And that's where our faith is different. You know, Christ is different from that. I just jotted some things down and put them on the screen. Just think of all the ways that our faith is spoken of as consistent. I don't know. What did I do there? Well, I skipped over Jesus. I shouldn't do that. He wouldn't appreciate that. Christ, right? He's referred to as the rock. Right? That's a connotation of certainty. He's not moving. He's the chief cornerstone. You can't move a chief cornerstone, right? I hope. If you can, you're in trouble, I would imagine. The building's in trouble. What was the last thing he said? I will be with you what? Always. Not just when I do the big, snappy, magnificent things. I'm with you always. I'm with you in the living room. I'm with you in the kitchen. I'm with you on your walk. I'm with you when you're doing reports at work. I'm with you always. I know what's coming. I know the hairs on your head. I know how I'm going to take care of you. I know how I'm going to address you. Why? Consistency. Certainty. That's what you base a life on. He says he's the same. Colossians says he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Certainty. Jesus doesn't change. In a world where everything, economies are built on change and dissatisfaction, Jesus is constant. How do you fight that gnawing uncertainty? By clinging to Christ, by fleeing to the cross and the gospel, by keeping that relationship pure in God, right? Some of the things it says about God. God is the Ancient of Days. I mean, I love that title. I don't know why, but it just says. I don't know what it says. I don't know how to articulate what it says to me. The Ancient of Days means I've always been here. I always will be here. And what in the world are you asking? Is the Lord with us or not? I'm the Ancient of Days. There's never been a day come up where I wasn't here. Before there was such a thing as a day, I was still here. It says that he's eternal. It says that there's no shadow of turning, right? He doesn't change his mind capriciously. He doesn't change his mind. He can be influenced, but he doesn't change his mind capriciously. You'll never get to heaven one day and he says, I changed my mind about that stuff. You'll never go to prayer and hear him whisper back, I don't want to hear it. He never changes. And in this world that's filled with uncertainty, you can hold on to that. And it's the only things you can hold on to. You got the Holy Spirit, right? Let's don't forget him. You take him with you wherever you go because he's in you as a believer. It's not dropping in on you when you need him most or snoozing when you don't. He's with you everywhere you go. He's the earnest of our salvation. Always comforting. You can't read it, but he's always comforting and convicting and testifying of Christ. Every time as a believer you feel a twinge to talk to someone. Every time as a believer that you feel like you've done something you shouldn't have. Every time you feel as a believer some comfort that you can't explain. You know what that is? That is the Holy Spirit of God within you. And it's certain. And it's constant. And the world shifts. And the sands slip away. And everything comes and everything goes. And that which has is that which will be. And there is nothing new under the sun. The Holy Spirit is always with you. And I even have this. I have got the church. Brethren speaks of family. It speaks of relationships that transcend acquaintance. That's a certainty. The pillar and ground of the truth. You know, again, ecclesiology, which is the study of theology of church, is so neglected today. But it is in you people, in this confines here, that the truth is entrusted. You are a receptacle of what the truth of the gospel and the truth of the word is. As a group of people, we are entrusted with that. Pillar and ground of the truth, and of course Jesus says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I know people say, well, that's just the church at large, the universe. Maybe, but I kind of like the application for the local church. You know how many books I've read that said the church was done, through, the internet was going to replace it, home churches were going to replace it, this, that, and the other thing, we're going to replace it. The church is dead, the church is this, the church is that. I think the first book I read that said the church was over was in 1993. And that is, my goodness, far too many years ago. 29, 30 years ago. And you know what? It's still going strong. And you know what everybody hears about? This is the crummy thing. My goodness, I cannot believe it's 11. The crummy thing is, I'm almost done. The crummy thing is this. When you hear about local churches, all you ever hear about is stupid mega churches. And people who have failed them. You hear about high-profile reverends who are off doing unspeakable things. That's all you ever hear about. You don't hear about churches like this that have kept going for 50 years and that haven't had any sort of scandal and that have preached the same gospel over and over again. Or that church or this church or churches in Montana and Nebraska. You don't hear about the almost countless number of congregations that exist today. Praying for people, helping people, giving people the gospel. All you ever hear about is those monstrosities. There's not even a word for how I feel about it, to be honest with you. And all the celebrities when they fall from grace, and you get all these giant salacious headlines. What about Reverend Ordinary and Church Normal over here that's been going for 40 years? That's supporting missionaries who are preaching the gospel. That are trying their best and sacrificing and give so that they can teach another generation. Nobody ever mentions them in a good light. We're just all lumped in with all the crazies. One of the mega church pastors who fell said it best. And even though he fell, I still agree with him. The local church is the hope of the world. Not great big cities contained in buildings. Churches of 50 people and 100 people and 2, 3, 4 churches. Local churches are the hope of the world. And this is what, again, when we talk about spiritual highs and the magnificent this and the magnificent that, I wish I could, I may do this one day. I'm going to make everybody who comes to church come and sit down face to face with me and I can tell them something. I can tell you this. You are part of something extraordinary. You are part of something magnificent. You are. If you give and you sacrifice, you serve, if you invest yourself in people, when you're part of a local church, you're a part of the only thing that can provide hope to this entire world. And there's no great big telecast that's going to preempt that. Don't ever leave here. Whether I'm here or somebody else is here or anybody else is here. Don't ever walk out these doors and think it's just a church. There is no, this is just a church. This is the hope of the world. Father, I'm just grateful today for people's attention. Lord, I pray that you would help us to understand these marvelous certainties in our life that we love. And no one neglects them. And Father, no one, I don't think, takes them for granted intentionally. But every now and then we need to be reminded that Meribahs syndrome of wanting that next fix has led to the destruction of so many. And even so many churches. Lord, help us to be people who are just ordinary, faithful believers who feed our faith and who are aware that uncertainty can only be combated by the certainty of your word. Father, help us to live for that, to glory in that, and help us all to recognize that we don't need to be superheroes, and we don't need to wear capes, and we don't need to be people who are of great notoriety to be part of something that is indescribably indispensable. Thank you for everyone here who serves and gives and sacrifices, who stands to teach and greet and shake hands in whatever role they fill. Father, they are certainly giving out hope to the world. I pray you'd help us to recognize that this morning. I pray in Christ's name.